Hello, folks. Let's do this. Welcome to Dangerous Ideas. I'm Lee Camp. The big Tucker Carlson Vladimir Putin interview dropped. It dropped, man, and it is huge. No, I'm playing it up a little bit, but it how did just the dynamics of this, the idea that we are such a juvenile, pathetic, barbarian nation here in the United States. The idea that the only interviewer that will give you like a actual few minutes to hear what it is that Putin has to say is this kind of bizarre multi millionaire rich kid who has failed upwards his entire life and promotes xenophobia and at times racism. And he is the only guy that you can actually get, like, not even just do an interview, just like speak. He's the only one to even speak to the president of Russia. Like, it's just how did we end up here? But I largely thought it was a fine interview. I have some criticism of Tucker Carlson I'm going to get into, but because he is kind of promoting. Tucker Carlson promotes war, just not war with Russia. He's promoting kind of war with China. That's more his thing. I'll play a few clips backing up that case, but that's not the larger point here. The larger point is, there was a lot of interesting things said. I watched most of the interview. Haven't watched all of it yet. It is 2 hours long. And some various interesting things said, which I'm going to play you some clips of, but I'm also in this hour going to get into some updates in Israel's special genocide operation. It's going great. It's going great. The special genocide Israel's perpetrating on the Palestinian people. I'm going to give you some updates on that. Also going to get into the role of think tanks in perpetrating and pushing our endless wars, how it is that think tanks have become so pivotal in making sure the United States is always at war, is always bombing innocent people around the globe, supporting genocide such as the one Israel is perpetrating right now. I'm going to get into that. And we're also going to be joined later by activist Wayne Shung, who is the co-founder of Direct Action Everywhere. He had recently just got out of prison. I'm not quite sure how long he was there, many months, if not a year, but at least many months. And I'm going to be talking to him about his time in prison, the persecution and the attacks he's been under simply for freeing tortured animals. That is all he did. And our government and the state government of California have gone after him in all ways. Anyway, we're going to be getting into all that. Please click thumbs up, click share. I am one of the most suppressed and censored comedian commentators in the nation. And it is really thanks to you guys that I even can continue to have a show. But speaking of censorship, here is Tucker Carlson. You can't even get an interview with Putin on a mainstream television, on at least not one that he's willing to do. He knows he could go on CNN and be heavily edited, and they'd show 30-second sound bites to help the American people despise everything about Russia. But in terms of an actual hearing of what he has to say, he knows he has to go to these alternate outlets. And so here he is talking with Tucker Carlson. He starts off the interview with a I kid you not, half-hour history of Ukraine. Now, some of it I certainly did not know, such as the stuff that went on hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But most of it you and I believe, know. However, it is news to the American people. And I'm talking the recent history of Ukraine, the Maidan coup that the U.S. perpetrated in Ukraine in 2014 with Victoria Nuland's help. Some say genocide. In fact, that case is also in front of the ICJ, and they have chosen not to throw out yet that case, saying that Ukraine was perpetrating genocide in the Donbass region against culturally Russian people, killing 15,000 over several years. That was before Russia invaded Ukraine. And so Putin gives some of this history, which those of us who, are on independent media have been talking about this, have been calling this a proxy war, which it is, etc. We've known this history for a long time. So it's it's not news in that regard. But the thing is, most Americans are not seeing this stuff. They're not seeing the reality. They're not seeing what's actually going on in these countries or even hearing about it on your mainstream media. And they're not supposed to, right? In order to manufacture consent for war, you need people ignorant. You need them to not understand the reality of these situations. People don't just line up to, help kill hundreds of thousands in Ukraine without being effectively propagandized. And that is what has been successful. And that's why people, by people, I mean mainstream media largely, along with the U.S. government, have flipped the F out about Tucker Carlson speaking to Vladimir Putin. Anyway, I want to, Ben Norton did Carlson's getting a lot of praise for this. In certain regards, he should. He let Putin explain his side of things. And there's some praise to be given there. But a lot of people are acting like Tucker Carlson has no history of, like he's just fully anti-war and he's just wants peace around the world. But as Ben Norton talks about in these tweets, Tucker Carlson has a long history of pushing kind of war with China, of pushing xenophobia, of trying to
if Russia
for war with China. And I'm going to play some of those clips in a moment. But here he is trying to get Putin to agree with him that China is the real enemy and that China, is going to run roughshod over these other countries. And you'll see, I'll probably play most of these 2 minutes. You'll see what Putin's response is, although I'll probably play it a little faster speed than 1-to-1,
Question is what comes next. And maybe you trade one colonial power for another much less sentimental and forgiving colonial power. I mean,
I just want to say that right there, he calls China a colonial power when in fact China is not colonizing other countries, at least not recently. And so to act like China is doing the exact same thing as the United States is just, it's either ignorant or it's trying to manufacture consent for war with China. China does not have 800, 900 military bases around the world. China is not bombing in other countries. China is not tearing up other societies the way the U.S. does and is doing on a daily basis. So to just be like, the U.S. is a colonial power and China is a colonial power is at minimum willfully ignorant. Of course, Tucker Carlson has mastered the look of kind of willful ignorance, right? I'll probably point it out again, but throughout all his interviews, Tucker Carlson just kind of looks like, well, I don't understand what's happening, but why? And I know he's smarter than that. He does know these answers. He does know what's happening, but he likes to play this like, eh. And I also saw an interview with him it was several months ago. It probably was filmed several months before that, talking about how it only occurred to him, like he used to be on CNN for years and years, right? It only occurred to him in the past few years that, oh my God, our media, the US media, is part of the problem. And they actually are propagandizing to the people. And he just realized that a couple of years ago. And he was inside of it. Like he spent, 10 years at CNN or something? So either he's the dumbest human being to ever live, being inside of CNN for 10 years and not realizing it's propaganda, or he thinks that that's a better, kind of persona to have as the guy who just figured out what corporate media is. Anyway, side note.
The BRICS, for example, in danger of being completely dominated by the Chinese economy in a way that's not good for their sovereignty.
Most of you know what BRICS is, right? It's the alternative to kind of the World Bank system. It's going outside the petrodollar, and the biggest countries involved in it are China and Russia and Brazil. And it is a complete rift in the world economic hegemony of the United States. It is a major change in the way our world works in a very positive way, because the U.S. should not have hegemony. So it is a very positive moment. And Tucker is trying to set Putin up to say, oh, yeah, you're right. China is just going to take over all these other countries and look at evil China. Now, of course, that's not what Putin says.
Do you worry about that?
Well, we have heard those boogeyman stories before. It is a boogeyman story. We're neighbors with China. You cannot choose neighbors just as you cannot choose close relatives. We share a border of 1,000 kilometers with them. This is number one. Second, we have a centuries long history of coexistence. We're used to it. Third, China's foreign policy philosophy is not aggressive. Its idea is to always look for compromise, and we can see that. The next
See, these are some of the things that are horrifying for the U.S. ruling elite to have put in front of Americans. And I'm not saying I agree with everything Putin does or says. There's plenty of his actions that I do not support. But in terms of ideas, like the idea he just said of we should work together with other countries, especially countries we share borders with. And China does not have the aggressive foreign policy that the U.S. has. China is not, I mean, I'm adding this part. China is not bombing and killing children around the world. Like there are many things, that most of which he just said, that some of which I added, that the U.S. ruling elite do not want put in front of the American people. They don't want the American people hearing these things. China needs to be the big bad boogeyman, as the word he uses. China needs to be the big bad boogeyman. And Tucker Carlson is part of that manufacturing of consent for war, be it Cold War or hot war against China. And Tucker Carlson's part of that. So Tucker Carlson was trying to set up that type of answer, and he gets rebuked. Now, luckily, Tucker Carlson is on the right side of the information war, I guess, on Ukraine. I don't know that he's doing it for the right reasons. I do think he probably cares a little bit about white people dying, maybe. He certainly doesn't care about other people dying, it doesn't seem. But anyway, he is against the proxy war in Ukraine. He is against the expansion of NATO, but is largely from a place of wanting America to be stronger and hold on to its empire, as opposed to wanting a more equal world, a world of sustainability, equality, and peace. That is not really what Tucker Carlson's about.
next point is as follows. We are always told the same boogeyman story, and here it goes again, through an euphemistic form, but it is still the same boogeyman story. The cooperation with China keeps increasing. The pace at which China's cooperation with Europe is growing is higher and greater than that of the growth of Chinese-Russian cooperation. Ask Europeans, aren't they afraid? They might be, I don't know. But they are still trying to access China's market at all costs, especially now that they are facing economic problems. Chinese businesses are also exploring the European market. Do Chinese businesses have small presence in the United States? Yes, the political decisions are such that they are trying to limit their cooperation with China. It is to your own detriment, Mr. Tucker, that you are limiting cooperation with China. You are hurting yourself.
And by yourself, he means the United States limiting cooperation with China. And, nothing Putin said there is outlandish or even controversial. China is a massive economic power, 1.4 billion people. But on top of being a massive economic power, they also are the country that has taken the most people out of extreme poverty over the last 30 years. 850 million people taken out of extreme poverty within China over the past 30 years. And it is, as he said, to the great detriment for these countries not to work together in one regard or another. But the U.S. is trying to shut off Europe and Russia. Their hope was the U.S. hope of the proxy war in Ukraine. And the reason the U.S. ran around for a year trying to get everyone to say, oh, my God, Russia is the worst country to ever live. And Putin's Hitler and he wants to take over all of Europe. Part of the reason of that was to try and economically shut off Russia, to get much of the world to say, oh, my God, they're right. Putin's Hitler. And so therefore, we will not work with them anymore. We will not cooperate economically. And it worked with Europe, right? Europe essentially does not work with Russia economically anymore, or in a lot of ways. They still do in some ways. And of course, it is heavily struggling because of it. The U.S. doesn't give a shit. And it did not work with China. Instead, it actually put Russia further into the arms of China and into a partnership. But anyway, I'm getting off topic here. But let me just play before I play another clip from Putin. Let's see. Ben Norton collected some of Tucker's greatest hits on his like anti-China xenophobic garbage. Because you should know who you're dealing with here.
Russia is not America's main enemy, obviously. No sane person thinks it is. Our main enemy, of course, is China. And the United States ought to be in a relationship with Russia aligned against China to the extent that we can.
Now, you have to ask yourself why Tucker Carlson hates China so much more than he hates Russia. And a lot of people think it may come down to skin color. It's kind of like we should be aligned. The white world should be aligned against these goddamn Chinese. I don't know why he despises China so much more than Russia, but
China is the country that's currently, right now, murdering tens of thousands of Americans every year with fentanyl.
Which is such a stretch. It is such an amazing stretch to be like, China's murdering Americans with fentanyl. First of all, people are dying from fentanyl, and it is horrific. And I actually did a segment on it last week about the 107,000 last year died of ODs in the, I think it was the highest year ever. But he's claiming it's China because the base chemical in a lot of what ends up being done in these, black market, mainly drugs that come into the U.S., the base chemicals, many of them come from Chinese labs, apparently, originally. I don't know how much of that is propaganda or how much of that is truth, but for the moment, let's assume it's true. They then go to Mexico mostly, but obviously other places as well, but mostly Mexico, where they're then cooked into the fentanyl and the other similar opioids that then are delivered to the United States and have killed people. To blame China, to blame China at all for the fact that chemicals made in some underground lab in China get to Mexico, which then get to the United States, is hilarious to begin with. But he's not even blaming them like they need to do a better job of finding out where these chemicals come from. He's blaming them as if, Xi Jinping is sitting there being like, we will take out Americans with fentanyl. It's so dumb, but that's all he could find for the harm that, like physical harm that China's doing to your average American. And so he's saying that China is carefully killing Americans with fentanyl. It's just so dumb. You notice he didn't say Mexico is killing Americans with fentanyl, even though it ultimately mainly comes from Mexico and Latin American countries. But no, it's China.
It's depopulating parts of the country. It's pushing our life expectancy down.
And he's also so outraged about this, about fentanyl and how many it's killing, which he should be. But wouldn't step one be, I don't know, to be furious at the U.S. government for the drug war, which has made fentanyl and other drugs like completely unregulated and more harmful and, bought in back alleys as opposed to actually decriminalizing drugs and making them safer so you could be like Portugal, which went from the highest ODs to the lowest number of ODs in all of Europe. Like, shouldn't he be furious about that? Step one, maybe. But of course, he didn't give a shit about your average Americans in certain regards. It's not like he spends a lot of time talking about homeless. It's not like he spends a lot of time talking about the people that are in prison right now, over 2 million people in our prison industrial complex that were arrested for having some of these drugs. No, that's not his thing. Instead, if it's xenophobic and against China, then it fits. If you were to show concern for Americans in other ways, then it doesn't fit.
That's how profound a threat this is.
Okay, so here's one reason. Here's another one.
If Russia ever joined forces with China, American global hegemony, its power would end instantly.
And you notice how he's very concerned about that, right? Because he wants, for people who think, for people who are left wing and want sustainability and equality and peace around the world, and you start to think Tucker is the good guy, here he is saying his goal is to make sure, that U.S. hegemony continues, U.S. empire. Tucker Carlson wants to make sure the U.S. empire is always as powerful as can be. So you just know that. Don't start to think that he's somehow left wing or something.
You'd have the world's largest landmass and largest natural gas reserves allied with the world's largest population and world's largest economy. So a Russia-China axis would be not just more powerful than the United States, but much more powerful. It would have the scale to control a lot of the world's economy and trade routes and raw materials. It could project military force that, posturing aside, we actually don't have the power to stop.
And there he is, assuming that China wants to exert military force around the world when they have shown no interest in doing that. They spend like a fraction of what the U.S. does in military. The U.S. has 800 to 900 military bases around the world. China has one outside of China. I think they might be working on the second one right now. But the literal, not 100, one. They've won outside of China. China has shown, and they're not bombing anywhere. Whereas Obama's final year, he was bombing, 26,000 bombs were dropped by the U.S. military under Obama. His final year. Trump's first year, 40,000 bombs were dropped. I'm sure the numbers are essentially the same now, but they stopped. The Pentagon, I believe, have stopped giving those numbers out, have stopped reporting on those numbers because they don't want the American people to know just how many people they're murdering every day. All right, let's jump to another part of the interview. Another good part of the interview about the Nord Stream pipeline. And I will give Tucker Carlson credit for asking this question.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, do you have I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
У вас лично, может быть, есть алиби, у вас лично.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
Знаете,
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities.
Now, for one thing, saying, do you have evidence? It's like, well, he could have classified evidence that he's not allowed to give. I mean, for one thing, if Russia is spying in the Baltic Sea underneath, next to Norway, they probably don't want to reveal that, maybe, or at least they don't want to reveal how they would know such things. So there's a reason he might not want to say whether they have exact proof. But even if they didn't have, let's say Russia didn't have the smoking gun of, who blew up Nord Stream, as Putin's saying, you look at who wanted to do it and who had the ability. And he talks about the ability to go down to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and blow up the pipeline. But it was actually 3 explosions. They blew up 3 out of 4 pipelines at the bottom of the Baltic Sea in a rather complicated, and these are not just pipelines. When you put something at the bottom of a sea, you don't just lay down a pipe. These are pipelines with, feet and feet of cement around them. It would have to be a very impressive kind of explosive to take out these pipelines. And so he says, who has that kind of capability along with the desire to take out those pipelines? Well, it's clearly the United States. Now, whether they handed that ability, you know, the explosives and the technology that was needed over to Ukraine or Denmark or something. Was it Denmark or was it Norway? I can't even remember. But anyway, it doesn't really matter, and it's a fair point that, and it's one of the reasons that most of us know it was the United States. Is the United States had talked about blowing up these pipelines. They didn't use the term blowing up. Had talked about stopping these pipelines. Biden had said in an interview, "We will stop those pipelines." And when pressed on that, when one of the interviewers said, "How are you going to stop the pipelines? It's a deal between Germany and Russia." Biden gave a little smirk and said, "We have ways," basically saying we would blow it up. I mean, what? Like, he basically admitted it on live television. What more do you need as to who blew up the pipelines?
Because there may be many people interested, but not all of them are capable of sinking to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and carrying out this explosion. These two components should be connected. Who is interested and who is capable of doing it?
But I'm confused. I mean, that's the biggest act of industrial terrorism ever, and it's the largest emission of CO2 in history. Okay, so if you had...
I think it was actually methane, which is far more dangerous than CO2. But it's interesting Tucker Carlson cares about CO2 or methane emissions, considering I don't know why he would care, considering I don't even think he believes climate change is real. So, you know, if he wants to live in that false world, if climate change isn't real, then why would he care about emissions? Anyway.
Had evidence, and presumably given your security services, your intel services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West did this. Why wouldn't you present it and win a propaganda victory?
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media.
Yeah, another good point is that the US has a propaganda system that is so massive that anything Russia does is going to be, the descriptions of it are going to be dictated on the world stage by the United States and Western propaganda, which we've seen again and again. But it is interesting that despite the massive propaganda abilities of the United States, it's failing because it is so egregious what the U.S. is doing, such as blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines, that the world is finding out anyway, even though Russia does not have anything near the propaganda abilities in terms of number of eyeballs that the U.S. does. Even despite that, the world is largely figuring out the truth also about the genocide Israel's perpetrating. The truth is getting out there, and the U.S. can't stop it. And that is an impressive change in our reality. And to speak to that, 80% of the world lives, the world population, 80% live in countries that have not signed on to the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine. They've not said that it doesn't mean they've necessarily sided with Russia. Many of them have just said, we're not going to be a part of it. But the U.S. has heavily pressured just about every country around the world to sign on to sanctions against Russia, saying this is all Russia's fault. There's no history behind it. The U.S. didn't do anything. Just get Russia. And 80% of the world's population is in countries that have not signed on to this proxy war, which, again, is a big deal. All right. So, again, the reason I'm not showing more clips of that interview is because a lot of it is stuff that I think you probably know already. It's, like I said, a half hour of it was history of Ukraine and the U.S. setting up the proxy war, the Maidan coup, etc. So there was some interesting moments, but less than you might think out of 2 hours. Anyway, I just want you to do this real quick. Compare, you don't have to agree with everything Putin's saying, but just compare the way he's able to speak and the history he's able to give. He spent a half hour, like I said, giving the history of Ukraine going back hundreds and hundreds of years. Compare that with what we're getting from the U.S. president. Whether you agree or disagree with any of it, doesn't matter. Compare that to just what you're getting. Here's Biden the other day. Yesterday, I believe.
The conduct of the response in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, has been over the top. I think that, as you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in.
Did you catch that? The president of Mexico, Sisi, didn't want to open up the gate to Gaza. Do these sound like different parts of the world to you? Just a little bit?
I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate.
Biden talked to the president of Mexico to convince him to open the Gaza gates.
I talked to Bibi to open the gate on the Israeli side. I've been pushing really hard to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza.
So, so not only does he confuse the president of Egypt with the president of Mexico, and not only does he appear to think the president of Mexico controls the gate to Gaza as opposed to Egypt, but also, even if he had said the correct name, like the idea that as a genocide is being perpetrated with U.S. bombs, U.S. money, U.S., according to the New York Times, the CIA is helping Israel assassinate Palestinians, U.S. troops on standby to facilitate an invasion of Gaza. With all of that going on, as a genocide being perpetrated, he's saying he got the gate to open for a couple of trucks to go through. A little bit of humanitarian aid, a little bit of food got through. Like, that is less than the least you could do. That is fucking nothing. Nothing when a genocide is going down. When thousands are dying every week. We're talking 28,000 people, 100,000 either dead, wounded, or missing. Chances are 28,000 is a very low estimate of how many have been killed in Gaza because many of the missing are under rubble, dead. So 28,000 is low. 70% women and children. And you are like, I called the president of Mexico and got him to open the gate for a few minutes. It's just aggressively pathetic. It's meaningless. Meaningless. Because the U.S. is not actually trying to stop this genocide. The U.S. is letting Israel and facilitating Israel's genocide on the people of Gaza. And now, why not show you a short clip of Nancy Pelosi nearly punching Medea Benjamin in the face for calling her an Israel apologist. Nancy Pelosi, who has endorsed this genocide at every turn, voted for it at every turn. Medea Benjamin, a friend of the show, been on several times, co-founder of Code Pink. She is in the halls of Congress, and she calls Nancy Pelosi an Israel apologist. And as you'll see, Nancy Pelosi just about punches her in the face.
You are one Israel apologist. You are one Israel apologist. Yes, right here.
Look, you see the fist start to come up? She makes a fist and starts to raise it forward, and then probably thinks that might be bad for her political career. But... I mean, it is like she didn't even call her. She could have called her a genocidal maniac. She could have called her a murderer. She could have called her a child murderer. And instead, Israel, pretty nice way to put it. And yet that was enough to get Nancy Pelosi to nearly punch Medea Benjamin in the face. Okay, I want to get to, before we bring on Wayne Shung, I want to get to the role of think tanks in the endless war that the U.S. has been perpetrating for years and years. Think tanks are a huge part of this, and very little attention is given to them. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention, by the way, that please, everybody, hit thumbs up. Obviously, it's free and it helps. hit subscribe, hit follow. If you're not following on both YouTube and Rumble, I hope you do that. The full live streams are on rumble.com/Lee Camp. Hit the follow button and then hit the bell icon. On YouTube, you have to hit subscribe and then the bell, and you have to hit the all next to the bell, because otherwise they'll not send you alerts of when my videos are going out. Also, I've just been putting up several videos of me tearing apart the lies of various well-known figures. So far, I've done Bill Maher, Ben Shapiro, Rachel Maddow, and AOC. And that is all on my Rumble, as well as youtube.com/@RealLeeCamp. So hope you will click follow and help this show not be quite so suppressed. That would be awesome. Okay, so on to the think tanks. Oh, in a minute, this live stream will only be at rumble.com/LeeCamp, as well as my locals page. So if you would like to keep following the live stream, it's free to watch on Rumble. Head over to rumble.com/LeeCamp. It's from Covert Action Magazine. It's a pretty good investigative piece. Fake intellectuals working for think tanks funded by the arms industry are driving support for war after war after war. And as we know, Joe Biden is not the one really running this country. It's really people like Anthony Blinken and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and people like that. And where are they getting their ideas? I mean, yes, some of them may just pop up in their head in the middle of the night. Hey, let's support genocide in Israel. But some of them come from these think tanks, because not only do these think tanks spend a lot of time, playing the chess game of geopolitics, how can we destroy other countries, but they also spend a lot of time finding out how to correctly propagandize it, how to, if the ruling elite in the halls of power are going off something that was brought forward by one of these think tanks, they know that they have the endorsement of a certain section of the ruling elite as well. And so there's many reasons that these think tanks are incredibly powerful as they're funded by the arms industry and big banks, etc. A few days after October 7th attacks in northern Israel, the Atlantic Council ran an inflammatory article on its website by Jonathan Panikoff, a former deputy national intelligence officer, entitled, "It Doesn't Matter Whether Iran Planned the Hamas Attack, Tehran is Still to Blame." Basically, it doesn't matter whether Iran was involved, we should still bomb them. The article went on to support an aggressive military response by the U.S. and Israel that could potentially entail bombing Iran. The Atlantic Council has been particularly hawkish with regards to Russia, helping to fuel the proxy war between the U.S. and Russia and Ukraine that has decimated a generation of Ukrainian Russian youth and left us on the threshold of World War III. There's a book that emphasizes the undue influences of think tank pseudo-intellectuals because of their ubiquitous presence in the mainstream media as well as academia. They also run these social media platforms in some ways. Facebook famously basically gave their fact-checking abilities or dictates over to the Atlantic Council to decide what information should be allowed on Facebook. I'll give you a hint. I'm not doing so well on Facebook. They don't actually want you to see anything I say. Their job, meaning the think tanks, is to manufacture consent for the goals of their paymasters, weapons manufacturers and oil companies who profit off of war, along with foreign governments courting more U.S. military aid. Think tanks have become a symptom of hyper-capitalism, in which all aspects of society have become an appendage to the markets. And I'm glad they get capitalism in here, because that is the source of it all, right? It's not just to facilitate war and U.S. hegemony, but the reason for U.S. hegemony is mainly money at the end of the day. It's to make sure that the U.S. petrodollar and those who are enriched by it keep their immense wealth, and that wealth keeps growing. To continue from the article, even political influence is regulated by the free market, in which think tanks are an important component. The think tanks help condition the public to fear foreign threats, which is exactly what Tucker Carlson was doing about China right there. To fear foreign threats and support wars of aggression under the veneer of providing independent expert analysis. Paul Craig Roberts, the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Economic Policy under Reagan, has called the Atlantic Council the marketing arm of the military security complex. Yeah, security. That's what it gives us, right? Putting us on the brink of World War III. It makes us secure. The Atlantic Council's financial report from 2020 reveals that it received over $1 million from the United Arab Emirates. So even the UAE is helping decide who we should be at war with. It also received major contributions from the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Facebook, Goldman Sachs, Rockefeller Foundation, the NED, which of course is a CIA cutout, U.S. State Department, a Saudi oil billionaire that's good to hear. He's also helping decide our foreign policy. Ukrainian oligarch Viktor Pinchuk, Crescent Petroleum, and Burisma, the energy company owned by Ukrainian oligarchs, which appointed Hunter Biden to its board, with former CIA counterterrorism director Cofer Black. The Atlantic Council's close ties to the CIA were further evident when its former executive vice president, Damon Wilson, was appointed CEO of NED, a CIA offshoot that promotes propaganda and supports dissidents in countries that we're trying to flip or bring down. Former CIA Director Woolsey is listed as a lifetime director of the Atlantic Council. Former CIA directors Leon Panetta, Robert Gates, and David Petraeus are listed on the board, along with such war criminals as Henry Kissinger and Condoleezza Rice. And again, I can't stress enough, these think tanks that are all the things I just described are setting the policy for U.S. government. It's not the American people. The American people don't at all set the policy. In fact, I just played a clip yesterday of the spokesperson for the National Security Council, Kirby, being asked whether the American people get to weigh in on the U.S. support of the genocide in Gaza, and he was just indignant. No, Biden doesn't check what the American people want when he's making decisions, but he damn well checks what the Atlantic Council wants. Tell you that much. Oh, yeah, I like this part of the article because it does a little bit apply to me. One of the Atlantic Council's fellows, Michael Weiss, spreads his anti-Russia invective as an editor at the Popular, and it's also anti-Russia lies. I mean, they publish straight up lies. Anti-Russia invective as editor of the popular online media outlet, The Daily Beast. The Daily Beast has also come after me multiple times. He helps run a neo-McCarthyite website, Proper Not, which also, Proper Not also went after a lot of the outlets that I've written for, a lot of the outlets you probably respect as the best outlets on the internet. Proper Not had claimed were all Russian propaganda. Proper Not that promotes the worst kind of fear-mongering imaginable, attacking independent media outlets, including the Ron Paul Institute, for allegedly advancing Russian propaganda. So the editor of the Daily Beast, which did a whole article on me and a few other people and how we were Russian propaganda and how you should make sure. And they were trying, I think the main reason is they were trying to get Patreon to shut down all of our Patreon accounts so that we could not earn a living, because you want to destroy, when anyone's revealing the crimes of the empire, you want to destroy their, ability to have a career. In 2015, the Atlantic Council helped prepare a proposal for arming the Ukrainian military, sounding familiar, with offensive weaponry like Javelin anti-tank missiles, the same year that it presented its Distinguished Leadership Award to Marilyn Hewson, the CEO of Lockheed Martin at the time, which produces Javelin missiles. So you can see how this is an incredibly incestuous circle jerk of a relationship where the think tanks are funded by the weapons contractors. They're also made up of media people that promote these storylines that then manufacture consent for the endless war that the U.S. perpetrates. So it's all a big cycle, and it's all connected. And people leave think tanks out of their condemnation of this horror show that we create around the world. They often ignore the think tank aspect of it. Last February, Matthew Kronig, the deputy director of the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, argued for consideration of the U.S. preemptive use of tactical, quote unquote, nuclear weapons. So, Atlantic Council is arguing for, just use little nuclear weapons. The article says this would not only kill thousands of people directly, but likely cause what scientists characterize as a nuclear winter by injecting so much smoke and debris into the air that it would block sunlight and, of course, damage the food sources around the world. The Atlantic Council continues today, along with other think tanks, to whitewash Ukrainian war crimes, corruption, and close ties with the far right and neo-Nazis. Michael McFaul of the Hoover Institute even celebrates Ukrainian President Zelensky's crackdown on opposition politicians and media. Zelensky has banned the opposition party. He's also banned any media people that, journalists that don't toe the pro-war Ukraine line. In 2019, the RAND Corporation, the think tank of the intelligence agencies, issued a report calling for threatening NATO expansion and the arming of Ukraine in order to draw Russia into a conflict that would facilitate its overextension militarily and economically and cause the Russian government to lose domestic and international support. So the RAND Corporation did exactly, they called for and they put out the studies for exactly what ended up happening. Basically, the ruling elite looked to these think tanks as the game plan for their foreign policy actions. And this article, if you want to get more, and then they get into the Center for a New American Century, which is another major one and includes Victoria Nuland, who was one of the crafters of the proxy war in Ukraine. Anyway, a lot of great detail there. It's at Covert Action Magazine if you want to read it over there. And I just wanted to bring to you some of the truth about think tanks. Okay, we're headed over to rumble.com/Lee Camp, free to watch there as well as on my locals page. And I'm about to bring on our special guest.